1902, a small town in Vermont. Undertaker Elias Crow received an order with no name of the deceased, no death certificate, and no funeral date. There was only one measurement written very clearly on the sheet of paper inside the envelope: 13 feet 6 inches. The coffin had to be made of oak, reinforced at the bottom with 3 steel bars, with no name carved into it, no cross attached, and it had to be delivered to the house on the hill after midnight. Elias thought it was the strange request of a wealthy, eccentric family. But when he arrived, he saw that the front door of the house had been raised to nearly twice its normal height. The staircase had been removed and replaced with a wide wooden ramp. On the second floor, there was a bed nearly 16 feet long, snapped in half at the center. The dead man was covered completely with a white sheet. Elias was not allowed to see his face, but he saw one hand exposed from beneath the cloth. Each finger was nearly as long as the wrist of an adult man. 3 days later, the entire family in that house disappeared. A week later, the town doctor was found dead in his office, and Elias Crow never built another coffin again. Why would a dead man need a coffin more than 13 feet long? Why was the body not taken to the cemetery? And if the person inside the coffin was truly dead, who forced the lid open from the inside? Elias Crow was not a man who enjoyed telling strange stories. He was born in 1860 in Vermont, into a family that had worked with wood for 3 generations. His father built cabinets, his grandfather built wagons, and Elias chose a quieter branch of the trade, making coffins for the town and the surrounding farms. In small towns at the beginning of the 20th century, an undertaker was not just a man who made a wooden box. He often knew every family, every death, every winter illness, every accident in the woods, and every old person who passed quietly during the cold months. Elias's work required absolute discretion. The living could talk too much, but the dead no longer had a chance to correct what others said about them. For that reason, Elias kept careful records, without adding commentary and without spreading rumors. In his workshop, there was a thick brown ledger. Every order was recorded in the same structure: the name of the deceased, age, cause of death if the family provided it, coffin dimensions, type of wood, delivery date, and burial location. The notes were so plain that they were almost without emotion. A man who died of fever, a woman killed in a wagon accident, a child lost in winter, all of them were recorded in the same steady handwriting. That is why the entry dated April 3, 1902 became so unusual. In the space for the name of the deceased, Elias wrote nothing. In the space for age, he left it blank. For cause of death, he drew a single horizontal line. But in the space for dimensions, he wrote clearly: length 13 feet 6 inches, width 3 feet 10 inches, height 3 feet, bottom reinforced with steel. Beside it, he added a sentence that almost never appeared in his professional ledger: do not ask, do not look at the face, do not deliver before midnight. Elias had received strange requests before. Some families wanted a coffin made from cherry wood. Some wanted letters, wedding rings, or photographs placed inside the lid. Others, out of superstition, asked for a coffin built without iron nails. But no one had ever ordered a coffin more than 13 feet long without providing the name of the dead man. What made him accept the order was not curiosity, it was money. The customer paid the full amount in advance, enough for Elias to settle the lumber debt he had carried since the previous winter. For a carpenter in a small town, that was too much money to refuse. But years later, when he told the story to his son, Elias said that the moment he held the envelope, he felt something was wrong. Not because of the coffin's size, but because the order did not carry the trembling handwriting of a grieving family. It read like a technical specification, cold, precise, and not meant for the dead in any ordinary sense. The person who brought the order to Elias's workshop was a woman in her 40s, dressed in a heavy black coat, even though spring had already arrived. She came close to evening, just as Elias was preparing to close. She did not give her name, did not explain which family she represented, and only placed the envelope on the table, asking him to read it inside, not at the doorway. Inside the envelope was cash, a sheet of measurements, and a small piece of pale gray cloth. The woman said the coffin had to be lined with material like that sample, but Elias had never seen anything similar. It was not linen, not silk, and not any kind of funeral cloth he normally used. When he held it, it felt thick and soft, but so strong that it would not stretch even when he pulled it hard. Elias asked for the name of the deceased so he could record it. The woman said no name was necessary. He asked for the funeral date. She said there would be no funeral. He asked where the burial would take place. She said someone would show him the way when he delivered the coffin. Every answer was short, as if she had been told exactly what she was allowed to say. When Elias asked why the coffin had to be more than 13 feet long, the woman stayed silent for a long time. Finally, she said, "Because this time we cannot fold him anymore." The words made Elias stop. In his trade, there were deaths that were difficult to handle. Bodies stiffened, bodies injured in accidents, bodies distorted by fire. But no one used that phrase simply to describe a very tall man. "We cannot fold him anymore" sounded as if they had tried before or had done something like it in the past, and this time had failed. Elias did not ask again. He only said he needed 3 days. The woman placed another slip of paper on the table. It gave the delivery location, the Harrow House on the northern hill, nearly 5 miles from town. The house had once belonged to a wealthy family, but for nearly 10 years, no one in town had seen them appear in public. People only knew that carriages sometimes arrived there at night, and that the second-floor curtains were always closed. For the next 3 days, Elias worked with almost no rest. The coffin was too large for his normal workbench, so he had to set it across 2 long wooden supports. He used thicker oak than usual. The bottom was reinforced with 3 steel bars, exactly as requested. When he built the lid, he realized that the lid alone would be difficult for 2 ordinary men to lift. The strange thing was that the coffin did not feel like a coffin while he built it. Its size made the workshop seem smaller. It looked more like a boat inside a room, or a transport crate built for something that might still be able to move. On the night of delivery, a light rain was falling. The woman in black did not return. Instead, 2 unfamiliar men arrived with a large carriage. They checked the coffin's dimensions with their own measuring tool, said nothing about the quality of the wood or the craftsmanship, then helped Elias tie the coffin to the carriage and told him to come with them. Elias asked why they needed him there. One of the men answered, "If it does not fit, you will have to fix it tonight." The word "it" caught Elias's attention. Not he, not the body, not the deceased, just it. The Harrow House stood far from the main road on a hill covered with old pines. By the time the carriage arrived, it was already past midnight. Rain had darkened the roof and windows until the whole house looked coated in black oil. There were no lights at the front. Only a faint glow leaked from the second floor behind thick curtains. Elias had passed the house many times, but never this close. The first thing he noticed was the front door. It had been altered. The frame was unusually high, nearly twice the height of a normal door, and fresh wood had been added above the older wall. The front steps had been removed and replaced by a wide wooden ramp, broad enough for the entire coffin to slide up. Inside, the house smelled of disinfectant, damp wood, and another odor that was difficult to name, something like heated metal left too long in a closed room. All the furniture on the ground floor had been pushed against the walls to create a wide passage. The ceiling showed long cracks. Several interior door frames had also been cut higher, but the repairs looked rushed, as if the house had not been built for the person living inside it, but had only been repeatedly adjusted to endure his presence. The 2 men carried the coffin into a large room at the back. There, Elias saw the woman in black again. She was no longer wearing her coat, and he could see how exhausted she was. Her eyes were red, her hands had small scratches, but she still stood very straight, like someone trying to maintain discipline after everything around her had already passed beyond control. She said the body was upstairs. Elias looked toward the staircase and immediately understood why the house needed a ramp. The old stairs had been almost completely removed, leaving only their side frame. In their place was a broad, sloping platform running from the ground floor to the second. Its surface was deeply dented, as if something very heavy had been dragged up and down it many times. They did not take Elias upstairs immediately. First, the woman asked him to inspect the coffin one last time. He opened the lid, checked the lining, checked the steel bars beneath the bottom. Everything was correct. But when he looked into the empty space inside, Elias felt very clearly that this box was not made for the dead. It was too strong, too deep, too much like something built to hold what was not supposed to escape. At last they brought him upstairs. The room at the end of the hall had a door much higher than the others. Inside, the lamplight was weak. On the floor lay an enormous wooden bed, nearly 16 feet long, broken through the middle as if it had failed under weight. The bed legs had been reinforced with stone blocks instead of wood. On the wall beside it were deep scratches, not like knife marks or nail marks. They were wide and parallel, like the marks of enormous fingernails scraping the wall in pain. The body lay on the floor, covered from head to foot in a white sheet. Elias was told not to step too close. But when the two men pulled back the lower part of the cloth to prepare for lifting, he saw the hand. It was exposed beyond the edge of the sheet for only a few seconds. The palm was wider than the face of an adult man. Each finger was unusually long and thick, but not crude or deformed. The joints were balanced. The nails were short, clean, and carefully cut. It was not the hand of a monster. It was the hand of a person, only far too large. Elias was not a doctor, but he had seen enough bodies in his life to know when a death was normal and when a room was hiding something. The person beneath the sheet had not died from a simple accident. Every detail in that room suggested that he had lived there for a long time. The bed repaired again and again, the raised doors, the ramp instead of stairs, the scratched walls, and the floorboards sinking in repeated places. As they prepared to bring the body downstairs, an older man entered the room. It was Dr. Amos Whitcomb, the only doctor in town. Elias recognized him at once. Whitcomb had visited the workshop several times to order coffins for poor patients, and he was a man known for saying very little about other families' affairs. That night, however, he looked different. His coat was not fully buttoned, his hair was disordered, and his eyes were sunken as if he had not slept for several nights. He carried a leather medical bag, but it was almost empty. No medicine, no surgical tools. Only a few used rolls of bandage and a small notebook. Elias heard Whitcomb tell the woman in black that the body should not be moved too roughly, because the ribs had cracked before the heart stopped. The sentence caught Elias's attention. Ribs cracking before death suggested an accident, compression, or a violent spasm. But there was no sign of a heavy object falling, no sign of a fight, and no blood. Later, when Elias went downstairs to adjust the lining in the coffin, Dr. Whitcomb followed him. He stood at the doorway for a long time, then asked quietly, "Did you see his hand?" Elias did not answer at once. Finally, he said he had seen it for only a few seconds. Whitcomb nodded, as if that was enough. Then he said, he should not have died in this house. The ceilings were too low. The air was too little. In his final years, his own home crushed him. Elias asked who the man was. Whitcomb looked toward the second floor and lowered his voice. A man born into the wrong age. That was the only answer he gave that night. But years later, inside Elias's ledger, a loose sheet was found tucked into the page for this order. Elias said he had copied it from what Dr. Whitcomb told him during their final meeting. According to that note, the man in the coffin was Nathaniel Harrow, the last living member of the Harrow family. As a child, he had been much taller than other children, but his body showed no sign of disease. By the time he was 20, he was already over 10 feet tall. By ulcers, his height had approached 13 feet, yet he retained more balanced proportions than any case of gigantism Whitcomb had ever read about in medical books. The Harrow family had hidden him in the house on the hill for decades, not out of shame, but out of fear that he would be taken away. Whitcomb had measured Nathaniel's body in secret. He wrote that Nathaniel's heart was unusually large, but had remained stable for many years. His bones were denser than those of ordinary people. His lungs had enormous capacity, but the house was too low and too sealed. As Nathaniel grew older, it became harder for him to stand upright, harder to move, and harder to breathe during the winter when the windows were closed. The doctor wrote one sentence Elias never forgot. He did not die of illness. He died because the world around him was too small. After the coffin was placed in the large room, they began bringing the body down from the second floor. There was no ceremony, no priest, no relatives crying openly. Everything happened in silence, like a task prepared long in advance, but still terrifying when the moment finally came. They used wide fabric straps and a system of pulleys attached to the ceiling to lower the body down the ramp. Elias stood below, holding the coffin lid and watching in silence. even covered completely in cloth. The size of the body made the room feel smaller. When they placed it inside the coffin, the shoulders nearly touched both sides of the wood. The legs fit so tightly that Elias understood why every measurement had been demanded with such precision. The woman in black told him to close the lid immediately. Elias obeyed, but before the lid fully settled, he heard a small sound from inside. Not breathing, not the movement of someone alive. It was more like metal touching wood. Elias stopped. The woman looked at him. "Close it," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it allowed no argument. Elias closed the lid. 3 iron locking bars were fitted into place as required. But what unsettled him was that the bars did not seem designed simply to keep the lid from shifting during transport. They were arranged so they could be opened quickly from the outside. An ordinary coffin did not need that kind of mechanism. When Elias asked which cemetery they were taking the coffin to, no one answered. The 2 men pulled it out through the back door instead of the front. Outside, the rain had stopped. Behind the house, a narrow path led into the pine woods. The carriage did not head toward town. It turned onto a dirt track, circling the hill. Elias followed, because he had been told to inspect the coffin if it was damaged on the way. They did not go far. After about 20 minutes, they stopped before a low stone building hidden behind the old garden. From the outside, it looked like a place for storing firewood or tools. But when the woman opened the door, Elias saw a staircase leading down. No one carried a coffin that large down to an ordinary cemetery. They were taking it underground. The staircase was unusually wide, with long, shallow steps unlike stairs built for ordinary people. The walls on both sides were gray stone, cold and dry, with no moss and none of the damp smell of a family crypt. At the bottom was a short passage leading to a rectangular stone chamber. Along both walls were large niches, each one big enough to hold an oversized coffin. Some niches were empty. Some had been sealed with stone slabs. Elias counted 8 in total. Nathaniel's coffin was pushed into the 7th niche. As it slid into place, Elias saw a small symbol carved into the stone above the niche, a circle with 7 rays spreading outward, like a sun drawn incorrectly. Beneath the symbol was a single letter, F. Elias did not know what the symbol meant, but he knew this was not a normal family crypt. Normal crypts held names, birth dates, death dates, and prayers. This place had no names, only niches, symbols, and numbers. After the stone niche was closed, the woman in black paid Elias extra. She did not thank him. She offered no farewell. She only reminded him that what he had seen that night did not belong to the town, did not belong to the church, and did not belong in any of the records he usually kept. Elias returned to his workshop near dawn. In his ledger, he left the name of the deceased blank. In the notes column, he wrote only, "Delivered after midnight, not buried at cemetery." Then he closed the book and tried to return to ordinary life. But 3 days later, rumors began to spread through town. The milkman said the Harrow house did not open its door. The post said the mailbox at the gate was full. A child collecting firewood near the hill said the back door was standing open. On the 4th day, the local constable and Dr. Whitcomb went up to inspect the property. The house was empty. There was no sign of a move. No carriage had left. No new wheel tracks appeared in the muddy road except the old ones from the night Elias delivered the coffin. Inside, the furniture remained in place. The stove was cold, bedding was unmade, and wardrobes were still full. But every member of the Harrow family was gone. The strangest thing was the 2nd-floor room where Nathaniel had lain. It had been cleaned. The broken bed remained, but the cloth, pulleys, and medical supplies were gone. The deep scratches on the wall had been hastily covered with whitewash, as if someone had tried to erase them in the dark. The constable concluded that the Harrow family had left town in grief after the death of a relative, but no one explained why they abandoned money, silver, land papers, and personal belongings. No one explained why the horses were still in the stable, and no one explained why the path behind the house, leading to the stone outbuilding, had been sealed with a new lock of a kind not sold in town. Elias said nothing. He knew what was under that stone building, but he also knew that if he spoke, he would have to explain why he had been there on the night the coffin was taken below ground. A week later, Dr. Amos Whitcomb died in his office. The official report said stroke. He was old, overworked, and under pressure after the Harrow disappearance, so the conclusion did not attract much suspicion. But Elias was suspicious, because the night before he died, Whitcomb had come to the workshop. He carried his small medical notebook and asked Elias to keep it if anything happened to him. Elias refused at first, but the doctor placed the book on the table and said, "I measured him for 30 years. But they did not care how he lived. They only waited for him to die so they could take back what was inside him." Elias asked who they were. Whitcomb did not answer. He only said, "If anyone asks about the coffin, say it was buried. Do not say it was placed in the 7th niche." The next morning, the doctor was dead. His medical notebook disappeared from his office. But Elias had kept the copy Whitcomb left behind. Dr. Whitcomb's notebook was not long. Most of it consisted of measurements taken from Nathaniel Harrow over many years: height, pulse, shoulder width, lung condition, spinal curvature, ability to stand upright, and pain levels during cold weather. These notes did not read like fantasy. They read like the medical record of a man the doctor had followed for so long that he both feared and pitied him. But in the final pages, the content changed. Whitcomb wrote that beginning in 1896, Nathaniel often complained of deep pain behind the breastbone. At first, the doctor thought it was a heart or lung problem. But when he listened with a stethoscope, he sometimes heard a tiny sound inside Nathaniel's chest that did not match the heartbeat. It sounded like a thin piece of metal vibrating. Nathaniel called it the guide shard. He did not know when it had been placed inside him. He only knew that his father had told him that if he died, his body must not be cut open, must not be given to any doctor outside the family, and must be placed in the stone niche behind the house. Whitcomb did not fully believe it until one night when Nathaniel developed a severe fever. In delirium, he spoke in broken phrases about the northern path, the empty niches, the small man who keeps the light, and do not let them find the 7th root. These phrases meant nothing to the doctor. But after the Blackwater Point lighthouse case, the pieces begin to resemble one another. The 7th niche, the keeper of the light, the old route, and giant beings being watched or moved. In one special note, Whitcomb wrote that he had once seen a long scar on Nathaniel's chest, just below the collarbone. The scar was old, stitched by a technique unlike local medicine. When the doctor touched the area, Nathaniel experienced severe pain and demanded that he stop. The most important sentence in the notebook appeared near the end. "I believe there is a small object inside his chest." The Harrow family was not hiding a sick man. They were hiding a man carrying something that others wanted back. This explains why the Harrows held no funeral, allowed no one to see the face, did not take the body to the cemetery, and would not allow an autopsy. The coffin was not only made to bury Nathaniel, it was made to move his body back to the correct stone niche before anyone else arrived. But if that was true, the question became even more frightening. Did the Harrow family take Nathaniel down there to protect him from others, or to return him to a system that even they were forced to obey? Elias had no answer. But after the doctor's death, he began to fear that the coffin he had built was not the end of the story. It was a step in a process that had existed long before him, a process for people too large to be allowed to die publicly. Elias kept silent for many years. He continued living in the town, but he no longer accepted coffin orders. He switched to making cabinets, repairing tables and chairs, building shelves, and working on smaller household objects. When people asked why he had left the trade, he said his hands were no longer steady enough. But his son later said his father could still lift heavy wood and work with precision. He simply refused to build anything shaped like a coffin. In 1916, after several days of heavy rain, a landslide struck the northern hill. Part of the old Harrow property slid down, exposing the foundation of the stone outbuilding behind the garden. When townspeople went to look, they found that the entrance to the chamber had partly collapsed. The local constable planned to seal it for safety, but a group of curious workers went down before the area was closed. Below, they found the stone room Elias had seen in 1902. Along the walls were 8 large niches. Some were sealed, some were empty. The 7th niche was cracked along the edge, as if it had taken a powerful force from inside. When the workers opened it, they found Elias Crow's oak coffin, more than 13 feet long. but it was no longer intact. The lid had been forced upward from the inside. The 3 iron locking bars were bent outward. The lining had been torn along both sides. The bottom of the coffin was marked with long scratches unlike rats, insects, or ordinary decay. Most importantly, there were no bones inside, not a fragment, no skull, no arm bones, no ribs. No sign of a body that had decomposed there for 14 years. At first, the workers thought the coffin had never held anything, but Elias knew that was not true. He had seen the hand. He had seen the size beneath the sheet. He had helped bring the coffin down to the chamber. One of the workers also found a small piece of metal caught in a seam at the bottom of the coffin. It was thin, slightly curved, gray, and did not rust. On it was engraved a line like a root, along with the symbol of a circle and 7 rays. Beneath it was the letter F. Before the metal could be brought back to town, an unfamiliar man arrived with the county authorities. He said the chamber was unsafe, at risk of collapse, and that every object found below had to be retained for inspection. The metal piece disappeared that same day. The chamber was filled with rubble before any local newspaper could take a photograph. But Elias's son had seen the coffin. Years later, he said that his father did not look surprised when he heard the coffin was empty. Elias only sat for a long time at the woodworking table, then said, "Then they arrived in time." His son asked who arrived in time. Elias answered, "The ones the coffin was truly built for." Elias Crow died in 1929. In his old workshop, his family found the brown professional ledger containing hundreds of coffin orders from across the years. Only one page was different, the page dated April 3, 1902. It contained no name of the deceased, no age, no burial place, only the dimensions of a coffin 13 feet 6 inches long and the note, "Do not ask. Do not look at the face. Do not deliver before midnight." Tucked into that page was a copy of several notes from Dr. Whitcomb, a small remnant of the pale gray lining cloth, and one sentence Elias had written near the end of his life. "I once thought I had built a box for the dead. Now I believe I built a wooden door for him to pass through." If the story ended with an oversized coffin, it could be dismissed as a town legend. If there were only rumors about the Harrow house, it could be treated as gossip after a family disappeared. If Dr. Whitcomb's death stood alone, it could be called coincidence. But when the pieces are placed together, the 13-foot coffin, the house altered for a giant, the stone chamber with 8 niches, the letter F, the 7th niche, the coffin lid forced open from the inside, and the recovered metal piece taken away, the story begins to look like part of something larger. Did Nathaniel Harrow truly die in the house on the hill? If he was dead, who opened the coffin from the inside? If he was not dead, why did his family place him in the stone niche as if following a ritual prepared for generations?